Yes, welcome to the Jamaica Young Police channel. To our loyal viewers, subscribers and Patreon member. At the channel, we are a group of law-abiding citizens who believe in the rule of law and respect the rights of every citizen, but not the ones who do not subscribe to such behavior. We do believe in and support preemptive strikes because they save lives. This is a logical conclusion because preemptive strikes save lives and prevent the further loss of lives. We are all about saving lives at this channel. We at the channel aid criminals with a passion and do not want them over here. We do not want your views, your subscriptions, your likes or your comments. Please go elsewhere where the red carpet is waiting for you. Over here, we want you to go to prison or the departure lounge at Madden. Moving on to today's video. Yeah, so we'll continue the series, of Vice President Kamala Harris's father. In his own word, in the video, the one he's a Jamaican from St. Ann, the Garden Parish, where Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley, both great men that put Jamaica on the map. It wasn't criminals that put Jamaica on the map. It wasn't General Starkey that put Jamaica on the map. It wasn't George Brown. So all of these people that you people look up to, they are losers. I'm telling you. So welcome to part 2 of our series introducing Vice President Kamala Harris's father, Professor Donald Harris, through rare video footage that highlights the remarkable intellect and achievement of this extraordinary man, hailing from St. Ann, Jamaica, often called the Garden Parish and known as the birthplace of global icons. Listen, global icons like Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley. So those of you who want to pick up gun because you want to become a Don or era leader, just remember that that's not going to take you anywhere. 2 places are going to take you: the departure lounge or prison. Nowhere else. With education, it takes you to places. So Professor Harris exemplified the greatness that this region of Jamaica is renowned for. St. Ann has produced individuals who have made significant contributions to the world. And Professor Harris is no exception. His story is a testament to the belief in the power of education and the importance of communicating knowledge in a meaningful way. And that's what we have been trying right here at the Jamaica Young Police channel to do, to educate our own people from where we are from. So as we explore this rare footage, it's essential to understand that Professor Donald Harris did not gain international recognition through notoriety or criminal activity. Just remember that instead his fame and respect on the global stage are results of a lifetime dedicated to education and academic excellence. His journey from the lush landscapes of St. Ann to becoming a professor of economics at Stanford University is a story of ambition, discipline, and deep commitment of using knowledge to better the world. So, when a guy give you a gun and tell you if you go shoot a man around the road, and then you will feel big because a man say, boy, you're a killer. It's just a matter of time before you get killed too and go to the departure lounge or prison. You want to be like a Professor Donald Harris. Education, and they take you places on the world stage. That you want people from your community where you're from in the ghetto to say, yes, say I down in the LA and that youth they come from. That youth they never in the mix up and all them things there. Just like the same right here. I can tell you, you understand what I'm saying? The way I was raised. So, it's all have to do with parenting. If your parents are slacker, you can make sure that you put yourself in a position that you can excel. You don't want nobody to motivate you. You choose your life. You determine at what age what you want to do in life. You still can change. But you don't want to mask yourself in a life of criminality, because at the end of the day, 2 places you're going to end up. You either go to the departure lounge or prison. 9 out of 10 times one of your friends were involved in a criminal gang is going to kill you. So I just saw it go. So you want to leave them kind of lifestyle and education. You understand? Just remember that this man is on a criminal activity. Why? This man is right there on the global stage. For those I am trying to reach, it's crucial to note that the path to success and respect does not lie in the glorification of criminal behavior or the admiration of those who have chosen a life of crime. Instead, true greatness comes from striving for excellence, pursuing education, and making positive contributions to society. Professor Harris is a shining example of this, and his story is one that should inspire us all to look up to individuals who are making the world a better place. In a world where too many are quick to idolize those who glorify negative lifestyle, it's time to shift our focus. Instead of looking up to those who are trapped in a cycle of crime and imprisonment, we should celebrate and emulate people like Professor Donald Harris, individuals who use their talent and education to uplift others and make lasting positive changes in the world. Education is a powerful tool that can transform lives, communities, and entire nations. Professor Harris's achievements remind us of the importance of investing in our minds in the right way and using our knowledge to benefit others, not in a criminality. If you think of outsmart people or if you kill people, at any idea you're going to dead or go to prison. That's what your life you want to live, or you want to live a life where you can show that you have amassed this amount of knowledge through education, and then you have all the certification and show, and you're able to knock shoulder with people that some people don't dream of. People involved in a criminality, that's not going to put them anywhere. I tell you, two places. Rick Dick and all these people and the charge of badness is just a matter of time before they end up in federal prison or the departure long, or get deported right back to Jamaica. I tell you that. So remember, education is a gateway to transforming your life. So Professor Harris's achievements reminds us of the importance of investing in our minds and using our knowledge to benefit others. It's time to turn away from those who glorify destructive paths and instead look toward those who, like Professor Harris, are building a legacy of positive progress and hope for future generations. So let this series be a reminder that true respect and lasting influence come from notoriety, but from the power of education, hard work, and commitment to making a positive impact on the world. Professor Donald Harris' life is a powerful example of what can be achieved when we prioritize these values. So, let's choose to follow in the footsteps of those who inspired us to do better, to be better, and leave the world a better place than we found it. So that's why at the Jamaica Young Police Channel we keep imploring on you guys, read. That's the only way you're going to escape poverty. If you feel like criminality is going away, trust me, you have another guest coming. You see, they're going to lose everything. You're going to go to departure long, or you end up in prison. You don't want to live a life where you have to look over your shoulder, because that's the life of a criminal. I see me like a man like me now. I have to do that constantly when I am outside of these walls, because I have enemies low. I have enemies everywhere. The reason why I have enemies is not because I'm a criminal, because I hate criminals. So I want you to, you watch, you listen, and you decide, and listen to Vice President Kamala Harris, his father, Professor Donald Harris. So you watch, you listen, and you decide.
point is that there's very little evidence of what's called default penalty in the sense of reduced access to international capital markets for the countries that went into default. Quite often, it's clear, and this is sharply revealed in the evidence of Icahn Green, that defaulting debtors were able to re-enter international capital markets only to default again. Finally, a striking feature of the historical episodes is that capital markets do not repair themselves quickly, nor spontaneously. They typically repair themselves only after a phase of systematic outside intervention by government and international institutions. Now, history in that sense is very revealing, and I think the real problem is to identify to what extent, if in any serious qualitative way, is the current crisis significantly different from the historical episodes that we've witnessed before. I think certainly there are differences, and that those differences are largely associated with the changes that have occurred in the interim, certainly since 1930, in the structure of international lending and in the character of international financial institutions. But it's not clear to me that the formula for resolving these crises has drastically changed, and that, in fact, we will not witness, as we are beginning to see, and this is, in fact, the inference that I draw from what Professor Sachs calls a turnaround in the IMF. The IMF is coming to see, albeit after a 6-year lag, that there's a necessary role in this process for writing off the debt, as is clearly the practice in most banking situations, where the rational policy of the bank, when you run into a bad debt, is to write it off. Now, this raises, for me, another intriguing question, which I'll pose, about the current episode, which is why haven't the debtors, at least the larger ones, sought to exercise or use the threat of unilateral partial repudiation to push the banks into a position of making greater concessions? One would have thought, certainly, that from a game theoretic point of view, larger debtors like Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and so on would be in an ideal position to do this for principles and reasons that are well known in the financial textbooks, by the way, including a remarkably good paper on this by Gersowitz in 1985, where Gersowitz shows that even in the presence of rising marginal cost of funds, an exposed bank will continue to offer new lending because of the nature of the situation between lender and borrower. But in fact, this has not happened. The banks have not used, the debtor countries have not used what evidently is, from a strategic point of view, a very powerful threat. It is rather the banks themselves who have emerged from the situation, not only with the upper hand in negotiations, but smelling rosier than ever from each debt restructuring agreement, given the amount of commissions that they get on those agreements, and given the fact that they turn out, at least in a short-term sense, to get from those agreements a substantial amount of repayment of interest. And there have been over 90 such agreements, by the way, since 1982, in almost all of which the banks, I would argue, have emerged quite well off. The reason why this has not happened, why the debtor countries have failed to exercise what may be considered to constitute a powerful threat, has a lot to do with the structure of international financial markets, and in particular with the fact that the big banks are able clearly to organize a kind of coalition that is stronger and more united than any possible coalition that can emerge among the big debtors, as big as they happen to be. Nevertheless, the coalition of the bankers can always, in a sense, outdo them by effectively blocking any strategy of use of this weapon. Secondly, it's clear that the big banks have been aided in this counter-strategy by the international lending institutions because of the very point that Professor Sachs pointed out, namely they have insisted on dealing with banks on a case-by-case basis, so that the possibility of collusion among, dealing with the debtor countries, on a case-by-case basis, so that the possibility of collusion among them is thereby forestalled. Now, this brings me finally then to the question of the role of the banks. And here there's no question but that the banks have played a key role. I think everybody is in reasonable agreement about this. Some commentators go so far as to single out the banks for special criticism as the villains of the piece. For instance, Bernard Lewis, the well-known historian of the Ottoman debt crisis in the 1870s, points out that what remains constant across a century of history is the inexperience of the borrowers and the rapacity of the lenders. In a similar vein, a well-known Harvard economist refers to them as Robin Hoods. I think you will get the pun. It was certainly a well-conceived title and a rather neatly, in my judgment, expressed point of view. This is a title of an article, for those of you who haven't seen it, in the New Republic of March 13, 1989, by Professor Sachs. Now, far be it from me, in the light of this concerted attack on the rapacity of the banks, to come here and appear before you and try to defend the banks. But I would rather like to suggest that this position, the position of attacking the banks for their rapacity, or for being Robin Hoods, as the case may be, is in danger of being terribly misleading and in some respects may be considered to rather badly miss the point. I think the problem really requires more careful scrutiny and analysis, and in the brief time that I have here, I'll try to suggest what my view on the problem is. I want to leave aside, first of all, the question of their greed or their rapacity, because I don't think that that criterion suffices to distinguish them as especially different and unique, certainly not among other operators in the financial system or other corporations for that matter. And banks are, after all, corporations. I think we should never forget that. And that really is my point that I want to emphasize, that banks must be and can be relied upon to do as bankers do, which is to say, to distort a rather well-known phrase of Gertrude Stein, that banks are banks are banks. In particular, they must be expected to, each and every one of them, to maximize the value of their shareholders' equity and to strive to do as best they can within the constraints that they face. And in the general context, which we well know of from the textbooks as well as from the daily press, of an environment in which there is a high degree of risk and uncertainty, problems that are referred to in the literature as lack of deposit insurance, as well as the recurrence of macroeconomic shocks over which the banks themselves as individual agencies have no direct and immediate control. Thirdly, I would like to point out, since in fact it seems to be a matter worth emphasizing, that there is no evidence that the banks acted irrationally from the standpoint of the normal criteria of individual profit maximization. This is certainly the inference that I draw, for instance, from the studies of Shuli Usler and Sebastian Edwards and others, which indicate that the experience level of a borrower contributes significantly to the variation in spreads, and hence that spreads are directly correlated then with the level of experience of borrowers. This seems to me to indicate quite clearly that banks do take into account the track record, so to speak, of performance in judging and evaluating the kinds of projects that are presented to them. If anything, the problem for the banks in this period, it seems to me, was that in moving heavily into the arena of international lending to national governments, they had to face head-on problems that are intrinsic to the area of sovereign debt as such, and for which in fact the individual banks have no individual solution. I would only quickly refer you here, because I don't have time to go into the theoretical literature, to the work of people like Eaton, Gersowitz, Stiglitz, Weiss, and so on, who point out that it's extraordinarily difficult to define in the context of lending to sovereign borrowers what one means by an appropriate credit ceiling or the optimal amount of lending. Furthermore, issues of insolvency and illiquidity become very blurred at the margin when thinking about loans to sovereign governments. And in fact, some of these authors judge that insolvency and illiquidity is not really an issue in lending to foreign governments. Lying behind this argument is of course, the idea that there are intrinsic problems of adverse selection and moral hazard and monitoring and so on in the international arena when dealing with foreign governments. I would take the argument much further myself in thinking of the financial system as an intrinsically unstable mechanism, which even if there exists an equilibrium, that equilibrium, there may be multiple equilibria, and much of the current theorizing has shown that. Furthermore, that there are intrinsic problems of the runaway of the financial system, given the ability on the part of banks to always introduce all sorts of innovations that undermine the stability of any stability previously achieved on the basis of previous set of financial instruments. The work of Minsky and others are, I think, relevant in assessing this rather abstract position. Now, in this light, then, I think we can view the charges that are being leveled against the banks and the view of the banks as being the villains of the peace as really stemming from the view that they overemphasize short-run profit maximization, and secondly, that this may be at the expense of their long-run position, that in a sense the banks are insisting on their pound of flesh, ignoring that the patient may die in the interim. In other words, to put the issue even more starkly, I think the position of bashing the banks comes from a view that there's a fundamental contradiction between their private individual greed, what I'm calling here short-run profit maximization, and their long-term collective self-interest. And it is only from this position, really, that one can get the policy inference that many of these critics recommend, namely that the banks should cut their losses now by accepting a substantial amount of debt relief or debt reduction, as the case may be, rather than delay and take a bigger loss later on. Hence the emphasis then on the necessity for an immediate and sharp cut in the amount of outstanding debt. I think that in the light of the position that I'm presenting here, this recommendation must be seen to be noteworthy for the fact that it comes out on the side of the collective interest of the banks, as distinct from their individual greedy short-run profit maximization interest, and as distinct, therefore, from their short-sightedness in seeking to squeeze as much as they can by insisting on repayment now. Whereas, in other words, the tendency is to view this position as being on the side of the angels, namely the debtor countries. I'm saying that it is really a position that is dramatically geared to optimizing the long-run position of the banks as a group. It is interesting also, I think, that the position of bashing the banks has obviously aroused the deep suspicion and resentment of the banks. In fact, perhaps some of the economists who have taken this position in public and are well known to have taken this position should themselves be wearing in public beards so as to protect themselves with protective coloring from the bankers, because the bankers have been rather vituperative in expressing their resentment against those who have sought to criticize them in this way. My view is that this position of the banks is not at all surprising, because the banks have proved themselves in this long history of debt crises that I mentioned before, first of all, to be better able to understand their true long-run position than these commentators and critics admit, and secondly, that they're in a better position to maximize their long-run profits than these commentators admit. My interpretation of the strategy of the banks can be put rather straightforwardly. Hold out for full debt repayment now, while engaging in a lot of public relations about voluntary debt relief so as to take the pressure off and make yourselves appear to be quite rosy. In the meantime, allow public pressure to build up so as to force the government and the international banks to come to the rescue of the banks. This strategy, I think, has paid off handsomely And this precisely is how I interpret the Brady Plan, that it comes at a time when enough public pressure has been built up as a result of all the media attention that has been given and all of the resentment that has been aroused to get the government, the federal government, in this case the Treasury Department, to do something about the problem. And in this respect, furthermore, an implication of my argument must be seen to be that the pressure for debt relief or debt reduction plays very much into the hands of the banks, because it is that pressure which generates pressure on the part of the Treasury and on the part of the international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to come to the rescue of the banks by offering to give them to give to the commercial banks with one hand what they take from the taxpayers in the other hand. A position which has been well portrayed, I think, by Professor Sachs. And it is in this respect I see the significance of the media attention that I outlined at the outset of my discussion here. The trouble with the emphasis on debt relief and with the focus on debt reduction as a singular issue, so to speak, is twofold. First of all, it says nothing about the conditions under which the debtor countries will emerge from the crisis once it is resolved in this way. In other words, once we have had the debt reduction and the writing off of the debts by whatever technical means I'm not going into at this point, what happens then? I fear that it may very well happen that the debtor countries will emerge in a position of being further and more deeply entrenched in the supervisory and monitoring and disciplining mechanisms that the international banking system has for keeping them in line. And this is clearly what the IMF, for instance, is insisting on. In yesterday's Wall Street Journal, the IMF was described as insisting on the necessity for accompanying any intervention to provide debt relief with measures that systematically require restructuring and structural readjustment in these economies. And I think the IMF's understanding of structural readjustment is unique to the IMF and certainly need not serve the interests of the debtor countries. Secondly, I think that this position is troublesome, the position of focusing on debt relief as a singular aspect of the problem, because it does nothing to address the really crucial long-term problem that the world economy faces in the context of the debt crisis, and a problem which is very sharply revealed by going back into the scrutiny, I think, of the historical analysis that has been done, namely that after all of these major episodes in the past in which there was a substantial debt crisis, the world economy went into a period of sustained recession or stagnation following the resolution of the crisis. Were it not for the systematic intervention of the international lending institutions or of the collective action of various governments. And instructive in this respect, I think, is the recognition that after the crisis in the First World War, in the decade following the First World War, it was the so-called Dawes loan, which really served by providing a massive amount of liquidity in the system to forestall the possibilities of a recession coming from the transfer and reparations payments. Secondly, in the decade after World War II, it was the Marshall Plan that really provided the mechanism to stimulate the recovery of the international system through both trade and investment after the devastating consequences of the 1930s default occurred. What then I'd like to conclude by saying is that we have to think more imaginatively and creatively about the debt situation rather than focusing on these single unilinear views about the situation. We need, first of all, a large-scale stimulus, and that is clearly what I infer from for instance, the role that the Marshall Plan played in restoring the international trade system and investment after the war. And the large-scale intervention that I'm thinking of here would go beyond debt relief. Debt relief is itself a form of substantial intervention if it is accompanied by a 50% write-off of debt, which essentially acknowledges that there's a 50% free transfer of credit to the debtor countries. So substantial debt reduction would necessarily have to be a part of such a broadly based strategy, but it would have to be accompanied by new loans and grants as well on a much larger scale. It would have to be accompanied by an across-the-board cut in interest rates, as well as by technical assistance programs that would allow a freer transfer of technology to the underdeveloped countries so they can catch up on the substantial technology gap that inhibits their industrialization effort. And finally, it would have to be accompanied as well by the substantial opening up of markets to trade that would allow the debtor countries to realize the possibility of payback through gaining export surpluses. Of course, we know that that essentially means allowing a kind of beggar-thy-neighbor policies on the part of the debtor countries. And that in itself indicates why there's so much resistance to this idea of opening up markets to third world countries. Whatever the case, I think that this kind of broad-based strategy is bound to be far more effective in reversing the devastating slide that Professor Sachs has so dramatically and lucidly portrayed that has occurred in these debtor countries in terms of their living standards, poverty, and the rise in infant mortality and so on. Finally, as a matter of an alternative view of this, I think one has to address systematically the question of the structure of the international financial system itself. And the question that has to be dealt with is what is going to be done to loosen the hold that the system as it is presently constituted, and by that I mean the fact which Professor Sachs indicated, that 9 banks virtually rule the roost, so to speak. And this, by the way, supports the view that Professor Howard Wachtel has also portrayed in his book on the money mandarins, which is a felicitous expression for these 9 banks plus the euro-dollar market. This issue of the structure of the financial system has not really been posed adequately, I think, in this discussion. And in fact, insofar as the position of knocking the banks borders on a purely moralistic argument about bank greed, it really misses the point that banks exist in a structure in which they have to function, they have to survive and grow. And their actions must then be interpreted as reasonably rational policies adopted in order to survive and grow in that structure. So the issue then becomes, what is the nature of the structure and how can it be changed and altered in order to accommodate the needs of third world countries? I'll pause at that point and allow for discussions.
Yeah, so as we, so we come to the end of, Professor Donald Harris, delivering his presentation. So in the vast world of academia, it's rare to come across a figure who not only excels in intellectual pursuits, but also carries a rich cultural legacy that spans continents. Such a figure is Professor Donald J. Harris, the father of U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. His rare appearance on video showcasing his intellectual prowess as a professor of economics at Stanford University is more than just an academic lecture. It's a window into the mind of a man who has profoundly influenced one of the most powerful women in the world. Professor Donald J. Harris' journey from the small parish of St. Ann, Jamaica, to the hallowed halls of Stanford University is a story of ambition, resilience, and unwavering commitment to education. At the time when the world is more interconnected than ever, his life and work offer valuable insights into the complex interplay between economics, politics, and social justice. So in the video, Professor Harris eloquently dissects the intricacies of macro and microeconomics, delivering a speech that is as intellectually rigorous as it's accessible. His analysis of global economic issues is not just a theoretical exercise, but a reflection of his deep understanding of the real-world implications of economic policies on the lives of ordinary people. This man has spent his life, not just studying economics, but also understanding how it shapes the lives of the poor and the marginalized around the world. One cannot watch this video without being struck by the clarity of his thought, the depth of his knowledge, and the passion with which he approaches his subject. His rare public appearance offers a glimpse into the mind of a scholar who has spent decades grappling with some of the most challenging economic issues of our time. But it is also a reminder of the values that have shaped his life. Values that have surpassed on to his daughter Kamala Harris. It is important to recognize that Kamala Harris's rise to the position of Vice President of the United States of America is not just a personal achievement, but also a testament to the influence of her father. Donald J. Harris' commitment to education, his belief in the power of knowledge, and his deep connection to his Jamaican roots have all played a role in shaping Kamala Harris into the leader she is today. So you see, when I tell the people them now, the youth them are the people them from our community where we were born. Yeah man, we are talk about Jonestown, yeah. We are talk about Jonestown, Concrete Jungle, Waterford, and the other and Face, all of the places them where we live and all them thing there. We attend St. Mary's College, that's one of the best schools. Butch Stewart is a alumni, yes. So what we keep telling you, because we could have been sidetracked too, you know, as others, you know. Only two of us from my age group is left. Everyone else is in the cemetery, 6 feet under, 6 feet 6 under. So that's why we tell the people them, so education, read. That's the reason why Kamala Harris have reached about to be the most powerful person in the world, a woman of Jamaican heritage, ancestry. Her father Jamaican. She didn't reach it because bad nobody and she said, boy, our father shot her and this and that. That no work. All of these things that they impart into you people in our communities all about destruction and keep them in a power. Like Mark, Baby Trump, Golden. They don't care about you, all them care about is power. Or for going and rob from the people's coffer. They don't care about none of you. I tell you that all them care about are only you killing each other. Just like what is happening right now with Rick Dick and the others them where them are him and him friend them where were after them were all of them were friends. And now them are kill off each other. Them are kill people. And both men are in the United States of America. But we touch that some other time. We deal with that. Yeah, so as you have seen, Donald Harris' intellectual rigor and commitment to social justice are reflected in her approach to governance, her advocacy for the marginalized, and her unyielding pursuit of equality. So in conclusion, Professor Donald J. Harris' real video appearance is more than just an academic lecture. It's a powerful reminder of the enduring impact of education and the profound influence that parent can have on a child's life. As we witness Kamala Harris navigating the complex world of American politics, it's worth remembering the intellectual and cultural legacy that she carries with her, a legacy that is deeply rooted in her father's life and work. Professor Harris's intellect, His passion for justice and his dedication to education continue to resonate not just in the halls of Stanford, but in the action and decision of Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris. His story is a testament to the power of knowledge, the importance of heritage, and the enduring influence of a father's love and guidance. So if you have your daughter and your son and them not listening to you, they're a problem, because you as a parent, you're imparting things to them that you know what best, because you have been in this world for some time and you must know, because that's why you're your father. So knowledge is power. I hope you enjoy watching this series, of Kamala Harris and her father. That her father is from Senton. Senton is one of the parish produce some of the greatest Jamaicans. So have yourself a beautiful day. Jamaica Young Police Channel out.